let's go back to the question at hand,
Yeah.
which was the use of culinary herbs. Okay, so first of all, you want to be clear that every species, I know I've said this before, but this is important enough to really get this, because so many people are like, well, why does it exist, right, if it's not for us to eat, right? Everything's there for us, right? That's a pretty species-centric viewpoint. I happen to believe that every organism is here for its own benefit, and that plants evolved, whatever, they showed up, and they, like you and I, they have their own desires. Not each individual plant the way that you and I do, but as a species. Basil wants to survive. It wants to propagate. Every plant wants to make as many copies of itself as possible. Every organism is programmed that way, right? We're the only organism that I know of that has social taboos, right? So we don't just go around copulating with everybody we're attracted to, because that's not socially acceptable, right? Every other organism does exactly that. They reproduce as much and whenever they can, whenever they're able to, because that's their primary mandate, is to make more copies. Those of us here aren't necessarily trying to make as many babies as possible, right? It's a lot of work. It gets expensive. There's issues, all kinds of problems. So, but that's what every species wants to do, and basil's no different. Culinary herbs are plants that produce alkaloids, which give them their specific smell and taste, in order to warn their primary predators that aren't humans, they're insects, that they're toxic. Okay? This is why they smell and taste the way they do. The irony is, we come along and say, hey, that smells good. Maybe I'll eat that. Right? When they're making themselves smell this way so that insects know to not eat them.
Yeah, like fresh basil smells amazing.
Well, fresh basil, it's funny. When I first moved to Panama, one of the first people that I befriended, and still a good friend, is a man named Tomas in Panama. He's an amazing guy. He's like a wizard on the land. He's an organic farmer for 40 years. And he's probably 65 or 70 now. And Tomas struggled to feed his large family. Not only did he have 5 or 6 children, as is typical, but his children started having children when they were 15, which is also typical, and he was supporting most of them. And so, and most people there were not interested in paying a premium for organic produce. And so life wasn't that easy. And I thought, this guy knows so much. He can teach my gardening staff. We had 4 full-time gardeners. He can teach them a lot. And so once every few months, he would come, he'd work all day teaching my guys. He'd spend the night, we'd have dinner together, he'd spend the night, he'd work half the day the next day, and then I would drive him to the bus and he'd go home. And I'd pay him. I mean, he was helping me, I was creating some income for him. And the first time he visited, he said, Loren, he said, you've got tomatoes here, you should plant basil here. And I said, I don't eat basil. We don't eat basil, right? I'm speaking for the center. He said, no, it's not for you. It's for the tomatoes. I said, I'm pretty sure the tomatoes don't eat basil either. And he said, no, he said, the wind, we're on a mountain, right? We're up here, and the tomatoes are here. And he said, plant the basil here because the wind comes up the mountain. He said, the wind will blow the scent of the basil over the tomatoes, and the insects will leave the tomatoes alone. And this is what he did. He used herbs and other plants. He made teas and different things, but he used these plants in different ways, including just planting them near food, to protect his crops from predator insects. Okay? And he said, you can use culinary herbs to do this because most insects will stay away from them. Okay? They know they're toxic. And so, if you can accept the simple idea that the species, the plant, basil, wants to survive, what most plants do is they attempt to protect themselves so they don't get eaten. So years ago, when we were still in the U.S., I found a guy who was a wild edible plant expert. And every few months, I'd organize a group of clients, not people that were there to fast, but when we were just outside of a big city, I had all kinds of classes, and I had a full-day seminar once a month. We taught food prep classes, all kinds of things. So I'd organize this Saturday class would be like a 6-hour thing. We'd carpool over to this guy's parents' farm in Virginia, an hour away, and he would lead us on a 4-hour walk and show us the 20 or so edible plants out of the 2 or more thousand plants growing there. Okay? 20 out of 2,000 is 1%. All right? Now, most of those plants, he said, and you need to cook these to eat them. You can't eat them raw. And after the second one, I said, you know, it'd be really great, because my clients are all people who are either raw vegans or they want to be. If you could just show us, you know, some 20 things that we could eat raw. He's like, no, I can't do that. There aren't 20 things here in nature, wild, that you can eat raw. Most of them you have to cook to really be okay to eat. Okay? Why is that? Why are so many plants difficult for us to eat raw? Because they're protecting themselves, because they want to survive. Okay? Hang on. So you want to be clear. I mean, this is what these plants are doing. Okay? They didn't like conspire. They had a conference, a culinary herb conference, and they said, look, we're going to taste like this because we'll work really well with guacamole, and we'll do this over here because that will work with rice and beans, and we're going to do these things. We're going to make ourselves taste this way because humans, they've got bland food, and we want to help them make it taste better. That's not what's going on, okay? They're trying to protect themselves and do not want to get eaten. This is true for all plants, okay? There are no plants that want to get eaten. Now, lettuces, these are a group of green plants that have been bred, okay? They're virtually all hybrids. They have been bred to appeal to us, okay? And so their taste isn't as strong, and their toxicity is very, very, very low. Not zero, but very low. I mean, if you ate enough lettuce, you might feel sick, but you could eat a lot less basil and feel sick. Now, most people put a little tiny bit of basil in some food, okay? So is it toxic? Yes. Is that enough to hurt you? No, okay? Are apple seeds toxic? Yeah, they contain cyanide. Cyanide's a powerful toxin. If you want to have a sense of how toxic it is, if you were to take a half a cup of apple seeds, okay, and chew them up and swallow them, it would kill you. There's enough cyanide in half a cup of apple seeds to kill you, okay? But the thing is, we can't digest seeds if we don't chew them up. So let's say you swallow some apple seeds. Anyone ever done that? Of course, everyone swallowed apple seeds. But if you don't chew them up, it's not going to affect you at all. It's going to pass right through your body, completely unchanged, because you cannot. Protein digesters. So they don't get digested, they pass right through the body, just like that kernel of corn or that sunflower seed, okay, that you swallow whole. They're not affecting you because nothing from in them is getting into you, okay? And it's actually part of the strategy, right? The apple's strategy is to put these little seeds in there where we're likely to swallow them, so they wind up on the ground in perfect fertilizer, okay? That's what all the fruits that have little tiny seeds. Can you think of some other ones? Figs, peppers, cucumbers. Do you swallow their seeds? Of course. Do they bother you? No. Does that mean they're not toxic? It doesn't mean that. But unless you chew them all up, and like with tomatoes and cucumbers, they're in a little sack of jelly, it's kind of hard to chew them up. Okay? Strawberries, covered with little seeds. You're eating their seeds all the time. Okay? Most fruit seeds are toxic. Most fruits, most fruits, there are some toxic fruits. That's an unusual situation. Because fruits, as a class of plants, they're the only part of any plant whose sole purpose is to be food. I guess nectar. Plants make nectar to attract pollinators. It's food for the pollinator. But the purpose is to fertilize the flower. Similarly, plants make fruit to attract consumers, hungry species. It's not just us. I mean, here in the tropics, something like 70% of all the mammals here eat a fruit-based diet. Okay, they eat quite a bit of fruit. When this mango tree right here was bearing, we had to cut it down a couple years ago. It was dying, but it would produce 50 mangoes a day for a couple months. Can you imagine? We couldn't possibly eat them all, and they were amazing, amazingly delicious. And so there'd be mangoes on the ground all the time, and you would see these big iguanas coming up and eating the mangoes. The monkeys would eat the mangoes. I mean, everything eats the fruit, okay? Because every species is looking for calories and nutrients. And mangoes don't run very fast, okay? They don't try to get away when you try to catch one, and animals do. So, okay, so you want to be clear. Now, if you want to experiment with this, you want to test this for yourself. When you go home, not right when you go home, because your body's going to be pretty sensitive. Buy a big bag or box of basil, or if you grow it yourself, harvest a whole ton of basil. Fill a big bowl with basil leaves, or wash them first, right?
That sounds gross.
And cut up some tomatoes and have a basil salad.
Blah.
And I guarantee you will feel sick because it's toxic to you. But if you put a couple leaves in a meal, it's not a big deal. And when I do special meals from time to time, I use fresh herbs. I mean, day to day, we don't have any in the kitchen, we don't use them. But when I'm doing special things, if my family's visiting, if we're doing a retreat here, a yoga retreat, and we're going to do a special thing, I'll use fresh herbs a little bit.
If you need to make pesto, how else are you going to do it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you don't need to make pesto. No one's ever, I bet, ever held a gun to your head and said, make pesto, I'll blow your brains out.
I want to
Okay,
make pesto.
that would be need to make pesto, right? If you choose to make pesto, and I sometimes have chosen to make pesto, I use basil. Okay, I make it pretty weak. But yeah, you can do that. I know if I eat too much of that stuff, I will definitely feel it. My body's pretty sensitive. But a little bit from time to time, it's not a big deal.
Well, usually if you're making a sauce that's covering with some noodles or something else
Right.
that's spread out, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, I'll still feel it. If I can taste it, I can feel it. But, it's an occasional thing. It's okay. It's not a big deal. One of the things, it's too bad you guys won't get to try it. Come back for the fruit festival, and we will do a night where we'll have, because we have more, breakfast and lunch are always fruit. There's always greens at lunch, not at breakfast. And at dinner, well, there's always a salad. There's always fruit at every meal, always all the fruit you can eat. We've got tons of fruit. But we'll also have salad every night, and sometimes we'll do some other things. So I have a Thai-inspired lemongrass soup, which everybody loves, almost everybody. And it uses lemongrass, which we grow right back here. Okay, it's not something I'd want to eat very regularly, but I love it. I eat it probably a couple times a year, and it's delicious. And it's no big deal. I mean, I feel it, I taste it, I feel it. There's a little bit of hangover the next day, but it's not that big a deal. You can choose what level, and this is the thing. You want to be conscious of this. I mean, it doesn't help you to stick your head in the sand and pretend the stuff isn't toxic. It is. It is toxic, like most plants, okay? Hey, thanks for watching. If you're interested in more information about fasting in general, we've got a playlist there. If you're interested in fasting for specific conditions, you can check out that list. If you want to hear what people's experience was in their own words, we've got a group there, and then we've got another one which is all about optimal diet and how to maximize your health.